Hello, welcome to Shad Life. Well, I'm going to start a new series and I'll talk about what inspired me to do this series. But it's something that I'm kind of passionate about, so I think it'll be kind of cool to do this. Um, if you don't know about Our BMX, it's actually a channel or kind of they've been around a while. Similar to like Pink Bike in the mountain biking world, Our BMX started out with mostly website stuff, but now they have a pretty strong YouTube channel. And they do interviews every once in a while, and or vlogs or blogs, whatever you want to call them. And they usually pick somebody that's been very influential in BMX throughout the years. So I've watched quite a few of them. There's been Chris Moeller on there. R. Willie, I watched that one. And more recently, I watched Ryan Nyquist was another really good one to watch because he's been around a long time. And the most recent one is Bob Harrow. And so I was watching the Bob Harrow one, and I was just like, man, it's so cool to kind of see somebody's perspective from, literally the mid 70s throughout to current, and how they evolved into BMX and how they evolved into doing what they're doing. In his case, starting a bicycle company called Harrow Bikes, and his involvement with it, and then why he sold the company and moved on. One of the things that I feel like is missing all the time when I watch any kind of documentary on BMX or any kind of blog, like interview like this, is it seems like most of it, I won't say all of it, because there are some other scenes that I've seen documentaries about. There's one that's going to be coming out about 9th Street in Austin. I was just recently there. Can't wait till that one comes out. But most of the time, it's all about what happened in California on the West Coast and so on. And I thought I would talk a little bit about, kind of my experience when I got into BMX and how that evolved. And not only just me, but kind of my local area up here in Minnesota, and how did BMX kind of evolve and come to be here, because it was very different. We weren't in the scene on the West Coast. But man, my friend Steve, we're still friends today. I was actually just talking to him yesterday about this. We became best friends, and we were obsessed with BMX and obsessed with learning tricks and things like that. I got into BMX in like 1980. I have another friend, his name is John, who got into BMX before I did, earlier mid 70s, and he was kind of getting out of it by the early 80s. He's a few years older than me. And then I was hanging out with my friend Steve. So having talked to those two and kind of getting an understanding of what was going on up here in Minnesota in the 70s, and then what was going on in the 80s, which I personally experienced, I figured I would just talk about it. But instead of do a 2+ hour long video, which would be a lot, I'm gonna just do segments. So this first one is just going to be the intro to this series and kind of that very beginning of when I got into BMX. And so I got into it. I would say I got interested in BMX in the late 70s. I want to say 78 or 79. I didn't even know that there was a sport, like an organized sport, that existed when I first found out about BMX. I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And I became obsessed. And at the time, I had a Schwinn Stingray bike with the high bars and the banana seat and all that. And even before I knew BMX existed as a sport, I was zooming around this local dirt trail that had like one kind of roller jump in it. but we didn't roll the jumps. We always tried to just send it off the jump and land flat. Well, the bikes weren't really designed very good for that. I didn't really think, oh, I should be standing when I go off the jump. I was a little kid at the time. So we would mimic motocross. So we were kind of doing this thing all on our own without even really understanding what was going on the West Coast. It just was like kind of something as a kid. You're on a bicycle and you're on a dirt trail and you're making motocross noises. Whatever you want to. I don't remember what noises I made back then. I didn't know how a two-stroke sounded. I can guarantee that. But that was kind of the beginning. And then in 1980, my family moved from the inner city of Minneapolis out to the first ring suburb. That suburb is called St. Louis Park. Well, this is where my friend Steve and then my friend that I met a little bit later after that, John, also lived and rode bikes and stuff. And so when I moved to St. Louis Park, all these kids in our neighborhood had BMX bikes, and they were nice bikes. And so where I came from, everybody had department store bikes or cheap bikes because they couldn't afford the nice BMX bikes. But then when we moved out to the suburbs, there were all these kids with nice BMX bikes. And I was like, what in the world? So I became obsessed. I rode a kid's BMX bike. And it's funny because my dad had just recently gone out and bought me a 10-speed. Back in those days, that's what we called road bikes, was 10 speeds. And I was all excited to have the 10-speed. And then I saw these kids on BMX bikes, rode a BMX bike, and that was it, man. I hardly ever rode that 10-speed. I was so obsessed with BMX, I ended up kind of hodgepodging a current bike that I had. I actually found it. It was a monoshock, like Holiday, which is a gas station bike, but it was basically a Huffy rebranded as a Holiday bike. But it had a monoshock in the rear and kind of this long oblong motocross style seat on it, or MX seat, and it had steel Motomag copy wheels. I wouldn't say they weren't authentic Mongoose Motomags. They were like copies of Motomags. The bike was heavy, but I found that in a park, and my dad and I put it out and had a sign on it to see if anybody claimed it, and nobody claimed it. We reported it, and it was not reported stolen. So my dad said, well, I can keep it as long as nobody comes to claim it. So I fixed a few things on it and kept that bike. So that was kind of my first like BMX bike in a way. It actually had a handlebar with a crossbar on it and stuff. It wasn't long after that my friend Steve saw a BMX frame hanging in the bike shop a couple miles away from my house. And I went and bought that frame and started building up an actual true BMX bike. It was a CYC Stormer. And I remember those days very well because that was like, it was just that immediate obsession of BMX. And around me, all these kids, they had parents that were into supporting them. They were racing, and they had, Raleighs, Rampar, I guess is what they were called mostly back then, were super popular. Mongoose, I saw PK Rippers, Redline, of course, was a big brand name. There was one, I don't remember, S&S Works or something. I don't remember. That wasn't a very big company. But that was like literally 1980. That was like what the neighborhood kids had. And here I had this monoshock coffee thing, and I was like, that I found for free. I was like, So definitely a very interesting time. But that was kind of my start in BMX. And here in Minnesota, there was already a big scene in BMX racing. And so it was interesting because by the time I got into the sport was already well established. there were many tracks around the cities and everything, and I really wanted to start racing, and that's why I wanted to get a proper bike built up, because I knew that this bike, it was pretty obvious to me that the bike I had was not going to be competitive racing. So that was pretty much it. I wish I had a lot more photos or anything from that era, but I don't, and you have to realize I came from where we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have like really much for cameras, and we certainly didn't have video cameras or anything like that, and I don't have like many photos of any kind from that era. But once my friend Steve and I started riding together, you know, I met him in junior high when I moved to St. Louis Park. We got way into freestyle and got freestyle bikes and started practicing tricks. And I have some photos. I'll put one here just as a teaser, but that'll be the next video. It's kind of where the evolution of BMX for me and kind of in this area. And that's kind of where I got my start. And I was at the very beginning of BMX freestyle. The racing scene was already very well established. And I actually, when I did do some racing, eventually after I got my CYC Stormer built up, I did not do very well. I was not a very good racer. I was in the novice class and not even making the main. So yeah, I sucked at racing originally, and it took me quite a while to get good at racing. But when freestyle came around and we started doing tricks, I was doing tricks on bikes before freestyle bikes were even made or even thought of being made. And that's where, when I was watching this Bob Harrow interview, kind of got me thinking. When he came out with his first freestyle frame, I was already learning tricks, and so was my friend Steve, and we just were so obsessed with freestyle. That'll be the next video. This is just the intro to this series that I want to do, but I do want to talk about that and kind of the early 80s freestyle and how I got into it, and even the scene kind of here in Minnesota. And then, you know, I'll get into the 90s and so on and so forth. So this is probably, the series is probably going to cover from like early 80s to about 2000. And that's really like the major bulk of where I was involved with BMX and BMX freestyle and stuff. After 2000, yeah, I mean, I still rode and stuff, but I was no longer like into the scene, and it's only more recently that I've started really being kind of back like into BMX and into the scene and riding with friends and stuff again. It's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that in another video. But yeah, that should conclude this one. Kind of winging these off the top of my head. I want them to be very natural. And so, yeah, this is just the way I like to do things. I appreciate your support from my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.